my ex-husband, William McGee, was the director in the Itta Bena area. I helped with the classes. A lady, Mrs. Blackwell, Alice Blackwell, and Annie Dale Payne. There were probably others. There were a lot of people involved, but everybody didn't actually lead the classes. But I can remember those.
Itta Bena, Mississippi. This town, now known as the location of the educational oasis of the Delta, Mississippi Valley State University is also an area that was affected by the civil rights movement. This town has seen the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, but nothing could quite compare to the event that's the civil rights movement. Journey with us as we discover the history of the civil rights movement in Itta Bena, Mississippi.
Like many of the surrounding areas, Itta Bena has been a place of integrated blacks who escaped the grudges of slavery, discrimination, and segregation. With the integration of blacks also came the installation of Jim Crow laws, which were a set of laws that were made for the sole purpose of oppressing and terrorizing African American citizens, denying them the right to be a citizen and have normal lives as Americans, leaving victims to be caught in the wake of these laws.
There were two signs, colored entrance and white entrance. We knew not to go into the white entrance. That was at the laundromat, that was at the doctor's office, and the other thing was we knew that the railroad tracks, which are significant in little bitty towns, that was the dividing line between the black and the white community. You did not venture over across those tracks because you knew that you were going to be killed or abducted.
That was a very drastic and devastating time for Black America, a movement which was sparked by Rosa Parks, her refusing to give up her seat. And not too long after the murder of Emmett Till, not too far from here. So this area was affected in a great way during the civil rights movement as it come down trying to get equal rights, equal opportunities. And this been a predominant white city back then. Blacks were still finding their way. They were sharecroppers. Many of the establishment, what you see, was mostly white. Blacks started moving in around the 70s and the 80s. When I moved here in 73, so Itta Bena has come a long way.
Remember about if you went to jail, what would happen? Okay, now if you was black, it was only one sheriff that was in Itta Bena, Mississippi, and his name was Ed Wilbur during my time. But if he needed backup, he would call a few other people. As I said, you know, one person in particular, I know him well. He was from Port Gibson, Mississippi, and he was a student at Mississippi Valley. So he got locked up one night, and he was telling me that he asked Mr. Weber about a phone call. And he just, Mr. Weber at the time, he didn't call you by your name. He called you Sonny Boy. And he just shook his head and said, Sonny Boy, your mama can't get you out of here tonight. And if you stayed on a plantation, and which most black people worked, that if they got locked up, they was out by Monday, cause the boss man, or Mr. Charlie, whoever you might want to call him, told Mr. Weber, you keep him out of jail, and I'll keep him in the field. So that was for most of them, because they work almost from sun up to sundown. They had long hours.
Between the 1930s and 1940s, a jailhouse was installed behind a nearby diner. This jailhouse was the location where countless amounts of blacks were held up, some in blistering heat and some in shivering cold. This jailhouse was also not permitted by the city for legal building. A former resident, Ricky McCaleb, managed to give us some background on the history of the jailhouse.
It's been here a long time, okay? It was probably put in under the wrong circumstances years ago, okay? The man that used to run the Delta Cafe in probably the 30s or the 40s, I would be willing to say more close to the 40s. Now the bricks are going to date back to the turn of the century.
This jailhouse also managed to house 20, 30, even up to 60 African Americans jailed, simply because they wanted to fight for their human right to vote.
It was 40-something of us that stayed. There were probably about 70-something arrested, but they let all of the children go. They said anybody under 15, they could not keep them. And they let them go, but it was 45 of us that stayed in jail for 58 days.
It was put in by an individual, not the city, okay? Even though it sits on city property, the city property is the exact square footage of the building that it sits on. And this thing here is really it's a monument to something that should never have been and should never take place again. It's just awful. All of these old buildings have a lot of history involved with them, you know, and all of them are not bad like this one. You know, some of them are good, right. But you know, everybody wasn't bad. You know, there was only a small group of bad people, you know, and most people believe in right and wrong, and that's where they're brought up in this country, to believe in right and wrong. And you know, if you're wrong, somebody should stand up to you, you know, no matter who you are.
Further into the town, past the marketplace and into the nearby neighborhoods, was a small community church house. This church was a meeting location for civil rights protesters who would strategize, organize, and formulate plans to protest, boycott, and fight for their rights to vote, and for their rights to be humans, and for their rights to be able to have a say in the country laws and how they relate to black people. This location was also where many African Americans learned how to register to vote, which was illegal during that time.
We would have classes teaching people how to try to register. We started having citizenship classes. We started having adult education classes. And we would take people to the courthouse every day to try to get registered. Everybody would get denied because they had to interpret a section of the Constitution, and that was never to the satisfaction of the registrar. So what we would do was come back and go back over that with the people who had gone to make an effort, and we would go back over sections with them until they could go back. You had to wait so many days before you could go back and try again. So what we would try to do is get them better prepared before they went back for the second attempt.
Said there was a lot of fear out there, and still a lot of fear out there. Many people are still afraid. They won't speak out on issues when they should speak out on issues. For an example, I was maladjusted enough to sue everybody I had to for the rights of black people, but at the same time, I was focused on a point to make us absolutely make Caucasian live up to what they wrote. They wrote the Constitution. They wrote the Constitution that all men are created equal and so forth, and the right to vote. So we have to hold them to that line. So I was maladjusted enough to sue in order to get that done.
On June 5th, 1966, there happened a great event that made a great step towards obtaining U.S. citizenship, a march from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. The March Against Fear was the idea of one, James Meredith, who spearheaded the 3-week March for Freedom. With strong hearts and even stronger wills, thousands of African Americans marched the 209-mile walk to Jackson, Mississippi, facing much adversity and resistance along the way. This group, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., would make waves that would soon make people in the surrounding towns, regions, and states follow in their footsteps.
Like there was only one church in Itta Bena that would let us have meetings at the church, and that was Hopewell. We couldn't go in the other churches because of fear. He came through Itta Bena, and they were marching down number 7, marching to Jackson. And it's my understanding that he spoke in the Uptown Square, and that he spoke when they got to Quito. And people were joining them at every stop. And some people went all the way to Jackson. Some went a certain distance and had to turn around.
The effects of the civil rights movement can still be seen today. The movement eventually laid the groundwork for what is now the Black Lives Matter movement. The BLM have followed in peaceful protests to fight against police brutality, oppression, and racism. These moments, while sometimes fatal and dangerous, also show the bravery of African Americans that will echo through the barriers of time for years to come.
We still got a long ways to go. I don't want young people to give up. I want you to be absolutely sure and get focused. And when you get knocked down, don't give up. Just fall forward and get up and continue. Because suffering does teach one wisdom. I know that from my longevity and the things I had to go through in order to get an education. So stay focused and move forward. And don't be disappointed if you make some mistake or things don't go right. Try it again and again and again. And you'll find that after so many times, you'll become more familiar and you'll become a success. Then if not, suffering does teach one wisdom. You've learned from the circumstances that you've had to endure.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. One day right there in white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today